A quick note, in the last episode, I promised we'd be getting into Cambodia's banking system. I've mixed up the order of things since then. Banking system is coming up next week. For now, please enjoy Wrong Bedfellows. Looking over Ngor's life, I've been able to reconstruct a chain of events and a set of emotional triggers. Ngor went back to Cambodia in the early 1990s because he wanted to play a role in the rebirth of his war-weary country. That's true of many former refugees. But for him, this was especially apt. After all, he had started in the killing fields, launching his acting career and a new identity as a globally recognized activist. Ngor did what I think most people would do. He reconnected with a long-lost brother. I introduced him in Season 2. His name is Chan Sarun, and he happened to be a senior official in Cambodia's post-Khmer Rouge government. Soon, Ngor found himself partnering on humanitarian projects with none other than Prime Minister Hun Sen. He's now recognized as a dictator. One thing Ngor and Hun Sen had in common: a profound hatred of the Khmer Rouge. To me, again, Ngor's decisions look like no-brainers. If you were him, wouldn't you reconnect with lost family? And if you wanted to launch a foundation and to invest, wouldn't you take advantage of your Hollywood fame and your family connections to hobnob with the Prime Minister? But these were decisions Ngor would come to regret. As time went on, friends said, Ngor realized he had backed the wrong side. The government of Prime Minister Hun Sen was doing more harm than good. So what better way for Ngor to rewrite his own story and to rebalance history's ledger than to dive into politics himself? And that was yet another incredibly dangerous thing to do. My name is Patricia Noonan, and this is Who Killed Haing Ngor. Haing Ngor was an outspoken guy. I think his hardwiring, his nervous system, was locked up by his own likely PTSD. Certain topics triggered him badly. Suddenly, he'd be caught in an anger or grief so intense, he just didn't know what to do with it. Eventually, the intensity of the moment would fade, but the underlying triggers were never resolved. That's my opinion. It's based on all the interviews Frank and I have done in the 3 years I've worked on this project. An obvious trigger was the death of Ngor's wife, Chang Mi Hui. She died in childbirth in the Khmer Rouge period. Ngor was a doctor. In any other circumstance, he believed he could have saved her. Another trigger was the torture Ngor survived, again at the hands of the Khmer Rouge. Ngor pretty much always gave himself a pass when the subject was women and his sex life, but he had strong opinions about ethics. So a third trigger? Corruption.
He's a very unique guy. And you notice it right away. I can remember walking around the Cambodian border, which, wasn't the safest place to go. There was all kinds of, people with guns and political factions, and he would chew his mouth off about them, corrupt assholes these guys were.
That's Nate Thayer, whom we've heard from before. He was the Cambodia correspondent for the Far Eastern Economic Review. He first met Ngor on the Thai-Cambodian border amid the civil war and refugee crisis of the late 1980s.
He was critical. He was correct, but he had a big fucking mouth for Cambodia. He thought he was invulnerable, really. I mean, he was very un-Cambodian, how vocal he was.
Aid worker Andy Pendleton has a similar story. You could hear it in Episode 1, Season 1 of the podcast. Ngor visited the Site 2 refugee camp, where he was asked to speak. He went off on corruption so intensely, Pendleton had to evacuate him. Some of those visits to the border came before Cambodia's peace deal was signed. The country was incredibly isolated, and all but destroyed by the Khmer Rouge. They were the communist extremists who'd taken over in 1975. 4 years later, Vietnam invaded, ousting the Khmer Rouge and installing a new government run by the Cambodian People's Party, the CPP. Hun Sen would soon become the prime minister. Ngor despised the Khmer Rouge for what it did to his country. Communism was another one of his triggers. But corruption may have topped them all. This is Roger Warner. We first met him last season. He's Ngor's friend and the co-author of his memoir, A Cambodian Odyssey.
And the story, of course, is that Haing's family, his father had a sawmill, so Haing grew up with that. And then when he returned, he invested in a sawmill, which seemed like a good idea because a new construction.
Ngor's efforts to launch that sawmill were undermined by his rocky relationship with his brother, Chan Sarun. He was the director of the forestry department at the time. Wood was a key commodity. Cambodia was so devastated and isolated that it had little to offer the outside world in terms of trade, except their forests. Years of warfare had kept them relatively pristine. Where there's money, there's often corruption and danger. The logging trade was rife with cross-border smuggling, extortion, abductions, and murder. I went into that in depth in the Timber Mafia episode of Season 2. Here's where civil wars get dark and twisty, especially in the developing world. Wood was so valuable that the CPP government routinely did business with the Khmer Rouge. That's even while they were fighting an active civil war against them. The government needed to access the forests and territory the Khmer Rouge controlled, so they could cut down trees. And they needed to drive trucks through that territory to export logs. Imagine this from Ngor's point of view. That's not just corrupt. That's a moral outrage. Here's Warner.
And Haing had returned thinking that he was going to be a part of the solution. And eventually he figured out that he and his family together were a part of the problem because he had a brother who was responsible for the rape of the forests of this country and was making a lot of money and was as corrupt as anything that Haing objected to prior to the Khmer Rouge.
And I think he did have guilt. He talked about this sort of sense that people might feel guilty because they had survived. And he wanted people to feel that they had a role in rebuilding their country.
This is Amelia Casella. She was in the first and second seasons. She's the Canadian journalist who covered Ngor's feud with the director of an orphanage, which had refused to vacate his property. It was a long-running drain on his finances. Ngor insisted he just wanted to help his country people. And he mentioned something else to Casella. Politics.
And he was also quite strong in saying that he wasn't doing this from any political aspirations, that he really felt that it was his duty as someone who was successful and lucky to come back to the country and contribute to the lives of people who were still in the country.
Ngor's political ambitions are corroborated by other sources. A friend of Ngor's was Canadian journalist Dave Walker. Ngor had shared with him that he was going to run for office, Walker said, a month before his death. Walker wrote about that in the newspaper, the Phnom Penh Post. Friends of Ngor's also told the Los Angeles police that Ngor was gearing up for a political run. One was Marion Rosenberg. She was Ngor's film and television agent, whom I spoke to in the Season 2 episode, Old Friends. She didn't remember this when we spoke, but it's in the LAPD records. The police interviewed Rosenberg 2 days after Ngor's death. She had last seen Ngor about 5 months earlier, making it October 1995. She says Ngor never really discussed politics with her, but he did share with her the fact that he'd been asked to run for, quote, president. That was probably a mild misstatement on Rosenberg's part, or it's possibly a transcription error by the police. Cambodia doesn't have a president. It has a prime minister and a national assembly in a parliamentary system of government. And then there's another Los Angeles friend I spoke to. He didn't want to be recorded or his name to be used in the podcast. He saw Ngor between his arrival in LA around the 13th of February, 1996, and his death less than 2 weeks later. Ngor had been asked to run for high office, he told his friend. But he got out of it because, as Ngor told him, quote, it would get him killed. So this begs the question, if Ngor were running for office, what party was he with? Did somebody threaten him? Just a reminder, in Cambodia, like most parliamentary systems, a political party elects a leader. If that party wins the majority of seats in National Assembly elections, that leader becomes the prime minister. So let's tick through some options. The Cambodian People's Party, the CPP, were running the government. The CPP was dominated by then Prime Minister Hun Sen. He's the dictator whose corrupt government was what Ngor was trying to dissociate himself from. So we'll scratch that one off the list. There was also the Buddhist Liberal Democratic Party, the BLDP. Ngor told friends that he essentially liked them best during the Civil War, or at least their armed wing, the Khmer People's National Liberation Front. But Ngor was never a member of the BLDP. I met with party chief Haing Ngor on this project. He'd only met Ngor once in passing. That would not be the case if Ngor had joined forces with them, so the BLDP are eliminated. That brings us to Hun Sen, another top party. That word is a French acronym for a long-winded party name, the National United Front for an independent, neutral, peaceful, and cooperative Cambodia. Hun Sen were royalists, the party of then Prince Sihanouk. Ngor absolutely hated him. In 1970, Prince Sihanouk had actually urged Cambodians to join the Khmer Rouge. It was his angry reaction after he was overthrown in a coup d'etat, widely believed to be the work of the CIA. Ngor never forgave him for that. Prince Sihanouk was later elevated to King Sihanouk. Ngor used to badmouth him in public anytime he had the chance, according to a friend who spoke to Frank. It's probably one of the reasons that elite Cambodians found Ngor somewhat uncouth. King Sihanouk was another one of his triggers. Cambodia's peace deal was signed in October 1991, putting United Nations supervised elections on the horizon in May 1993. Thousands of refugees returned home, many coming from the US, Australia, and Europe. Like Ngor, many wanted to help rebuild their country. That means there was a slate of brand new political parties. Here's Nate Thayer.
At the time, there were 30-some political parties that were running. And a lot of them were from California, actually. Okay. They were like guys who had donut shops and were, Believe Freedom Party, want something, and so he was in the mix there. I don't believe that he ever affiliated with the party, and I didn't create one, as far as I know. And he definitely was not. He was not one of the parties on the ballot. But in the run-up, yeah, I remember him making noises, and other people make noises too.
Thayer just alluded to someone I've been wondering about, the Donut King. His name is Ted Noy. A former refugee resettled in California, Noy launched what would become a wildly successful chain of donut franchises. He created so many jobs for so many Cambodian refugees, he was honored by President George H.W. Bush. There's a documentary about him by that name, The Donut King. Ted Noy returned to Cambodia during the UN years, and he lives there now. In the 1990s, he launched the Free Development Republican Party. I reached out to him for an interview. Maybe Ngor was linking up with him. Unfortunately, Noy told my Cambodian colleague that he would not talk to me because Haing Ngor had been rude to him once. Welcome to the club, I thought. It's another incident of Ngor pissing off a prominent Cambodian. The last possibility I'll list for Ngor's political ambitions is the Sam Rainsy Party. Sam Rainsy is a leading opposition figure. He's a dual French-Cambodian citizen who returned to Cambodia after a career in finance. In fact, he was named finance minister after the 1993 elections, and at the time, he was with Hun Sen. Later, he left to form his own party. Did Ngor link up with Rainsy? The Cambodia heads I've asked about this think Rainsy would be unlikely to give up top billing in his own party to Ngor, but it's possible that he could have asked Ngor to be his running mate. I've reached out to Sam Rainsy for an interview for the second and third season of this podcast, and I've never gotten a response. We'll be coming back to him in a minute. The bottom line is, I haven't been able to establish which party Ngor was joining, and there were more than I've listed here. So I urge anyone out there with any leads to please get in touch. What we know is that Ngor would have been running for office in the 1998 parliamentary elections. So let's take a look at the political atmosphere at the time. This is where it gets interesting. First, we need some quick historical context. In Ngor's time frame, Cambodia actually had 2 prime ministers. Hun Sen won the historic 1993 elections, the ones organized by the UN. Their candidate was Prince Norodom Ranariddh, the son of King Sihanouk. They defeated the incumbent, Hun Sen's CPP. Hun Sen had been serving as prime minister since 1985, the bad old days of Cambodia's civil war. He's a strong man through and through. He refused to give up power. Essentially, when the UN told him he lost, he said he wasn't going anywhere. The UN wanted to declare their mission a success and leave. So they cobbled together a power-sharing agreement. Prince Ranariddh would be the more powerful first prime minister. Hun Sen would be the second prime minister. Key government ministries were divided between Hun Sen and the CPP. That was November 1993. The UN declared victory and formally ended their mission. If that power-sharing deal sounds like a disaster in the making, you're absolutely right. The so-called co-premiership between Prince Ranariddh and Hun Sen was doomed from the very beginning. Both sides were corrupt, and both sides were trying to cash in on the spoils of power as quickly as possible. Even when I was in my 20s watching Prince Ranariddh in action, I found him a weak and ineffectual leader. Hun Sen, on the other hand, is a brilliant political strategist. He was also a former Khmer Rouge officer, and unfortunately, he remains a deeply violent human being. Within 18 months, the co-premiership was coming apart at the seams.
By 95, Hun Sen and Ranariddh realized that this wasn't working. that Hun Sen still controlled the military, the police, the courts, and his party.
This is Brad Adams. He was one of the 1990s leading voices on human rights in Cambodia, based there between 1993 and 1998. He worked with the National Assembly Commission on Human Rights and later the UN Center for Human Rights. Prince Ranariddh was supposed to be the coalition's senior partner, but he was being outmaneuvered by Hun Sen at every turn.
By January 1996, Hun Sen and Ranariddh essentially declared their independence from the coalition government, that they were no longer going to simply do what Hun Sen says. And this was because Ranariddh had faced a huge backlash in his party and was possibly going to lose his leadership to Sam Rainsy or to someone else if he didn't stand up to Hun Sen. And there was this kind of famous meeting in Sihanoukville of Hun Sen where somebody in Hun Sen recorded what Ranariddh said, where he said that basically they were no longer going to just do what Hun Sen wanted. Hun Sen got very angry and the situation became very polarized from that point on.
Let's look at the timing there. That was January 1996. Specifically, it was January 20th and 21st. Then someone leaked audio of the meeting. And back then, in the 1990s, that would mean someone handed over a cassette tape. Hun Sen was spitting nails angry after that Hun Sen conference, when they decided to abandon the power-sharing agreement. Powerful forces that had fought each other through years of civil war were once again eyeing each other from across a bitter political divide. That is exactly the window of time when Ngor went back to the States. He had told his friends he'd been asked to run for high office, but he got out of it because, as one friend said, it would get him killed. Less than 2 weeks later, on February 25, 1996, Ngor was gunned down outside his home. Ngor's first trip home to Cambodia's capital, Phnom Penh, was in 1989. It was 5 years after The Killing Fields came out and 10 years after he had fled. He had a tearful reunion with Chan Sarun at the airport. And Ngor immediately found himself within Cambodia's most elite circles. He partnered with Prime Minister Hun Sen on humanitarian projects, restoring a road and building schools. One was the Haing Ngor Greengrass Primary School that I visited in Season 2's Compassion Fad episode. Ngor spent so much time with another top Hun Sen advisor named Chia Sim that his daughter had a huge crush on him. He could have married her had he wanted. We heard about that in Season 2. Haing Ngor did not pose an electoral threat to Hun Sen, both Adams and Thayer say. Even though he was a movie star, he just didn't have that kind of support. He had not yet publicly declared his candidacy or started campaigning. Here's Adams.
Hun Sen really did not like being betrayed. And it may have been that they had been friendly, and if he had been considering joining an opposition party, that might have made Hun Sen angry.
Was there a direct threat on Ngor's life? It's possible. Frank and I have speculated about this. Maybe someone close to Hun Sen pulled Ngor aside and gave him the scoop about how dangerous it was, urging him to drop out of politics. Maybe Ngor could read the situation for himself. No matter how he changed his mind, at the time of his death, Ngor knew that running for office was a life-threatening proposition. So what happened with all that tension between Hun Sen and the CPP? Let's circle back to opposition leader Sam Rainsy. He had served as finance minister with Hun Sen, but he was forced out in 1994 in part for speaking out against corruption. He then formed the Sam Rainsy Party. Rainsy is actually one half of a democratic power couple. His wife is Tialong Samura, who'd been the deputy head of Cambodia's national bank. She left that position in 1995. The Hun Sen CPP coalition was deteriorating. Sam Rainsy, meanwhile, was gaining in popularity.
Hun Sen tried to bribe many of the remaining Hun Sen MPs to just switch parties so he could have a majority himself. That failed, and that left Hun Sen with very few options, and that all culminated in an attempted assassination on Sam Rainsy on March 30th, 1997, in which a lot of people were killed, and the coup in July 1997.
Sam Rainsy was holding a political rally in central Phnom Penh. About 200 people had gathered. 4 hand grenades were thrown into the crowd in an attack that Adams and other human rights investigators linked to bodyguards of Prime Minister Hun Sen. 16 people were killed. Rainsy's life was saved by his own bodyguard, who threw himself in front of him. 3 months later, Hun Sen launched a coup d'etat, overthrowing Prince Ranarid. The democratic government, formed by the UN peacekeeping mission, was officially dead. As awful as it was, the grenade attack offers some perspective on the Haing Ngor case. Haing Ngor was going back and forth to Cambodia. There's no need for Hun Sen to orchestrate an assassination in LA when the Sam Rainsy case clearly showed he had no problem bumping people off in Cambodia. Like there's no necessity for that.
And very, very dangerous to carry something like that out on U.S. soil.
So what was the atmosphere like between the coup d'etat and the 1998 elections a year later, the ones Ngor would have run in? I'll let Adams tell you.
I think we documented 90 plus executions, but frankly, we missed lots more because a lot of them happened and we were never able to document them. People went missing. There were monks killed who were politically active. Hun Sen then installed a puppet as a co-prime minister. He banished the opposition, so Prince Ranarid was in exile, Sam Rainsy was in exile, Kem Sokha was in exile. In March,
I'm not going to say that Cambodia's democracy movement is dead. There remain decent people behind the scenes working for change, but it's definitely on life support.
The whole entire atmosphere was extremely tense, with lots and lots of violence. We found Buddhist monks floating down the Basak River and the Mekong River, having been executed. We had a terrible case where somebody's bowels were interred before being killed, or after, we didn't really know. I personally dug up dead bodies in
You get the idea. That's what Ngor would have been up against. When Hun Sen and the CPP want to retain power, this is the level of violence that transpires.
So it was a very, very violent atmosphere. It was a winner-take-all atmosphere as far as Hun Sen was concerned.
Prime Minister Hun Sen ruled Cambodia for 38 years, from 1985 until 2023, making him one of the world's longest-serving dictators. He stepped down in favor of his son, Hun Manet. Hun Sen now serves as president of the Senate. Frank and I reached out to him for an interview. We never got a response. After the 1997 coup d'etat, Prince Ranarid and much of Hun Sen essentially caved into the dark side. They joined forces with Hun Sen's CPP. Prince Ranarid died in 2021. Sam Rainsy and Tialong Samura remain active in opposition organizations from exile in France. The question you may be asking, do I think Hun Sen killed Haing Ngor? Have I changed my mind about that? The answer is no. I do not think he personally had a hand in it. He appears to remember Ngor fondly, and as Adams and I were just discussing, there's no reason to kill Ngor in Los Angeles when Hun Sen has no problems inflicting horrific violence within his own country. But let's bear in mind, Hun Sen is not the only violent guy in Cambodia. He has his own loyalists, and there's no such thing as a one-sided civil war. Everyone had to navigate the collapse of the Hun Sen CPP coalition. Other political players could have felt deeply aggrieved, and they could be just as brutal. Ngor may well have thought that he could be a force for good, but he was swimming with sharks. Here's Roger Warner.
He had expected to return as this, favorite son, Hollywood, leading the charge for regime improvement, if not regime change, and instead he found himself enmeshed in the worst of the problems of corruption of the new regime. And there were a lot of people of other political parties who absolutely held that against him. So he was in a very compromised situation.
The more I investigate this case, the more I'm blown away by the dimensions to Ngor's life that the LAPD either missed or ignored. Here's a problem that Frank and I keep running into. If Ngor were alive today, he'd be 86 years old. Records have been lost. Many of his friends and contemporaries have simply passed away. If we're able to piece this together 30 years later, what could authorities have discovered if the LAPD handed the case over to the FBI in real time in 1996? If they spoke to Sam Ramsey or Tialong Samora? If they spoke to Nate Thayer, Ted Noy? If they spoke to Brad Adams? If they spoke to Hun Sen or Chan Sarun? If they spoke to Larry? I'm also struck by how Ngor was all but infantilized in the LAPD narrative about him. He was just a grief-stricken refugee who got himself shot because he wouldn't give up a necklace with an image of his late wife, an image that he could have reproduced. In that narrative, he was not a savvy survivor, the doctor who spent 4 years conning the Khmer Rouge with a line that he was a taxi driver. He never gave his truth away, even while his wife was dying or while he was being tortured. In the LAPD's eyes, Ngor was not a man balancing his moral compass with a short temper and an addiction to risk. He was not a man with an active sex life. In that narrative, Ngor had virtually no personal agency, not as an investor, a humanitarian, or a political player amid the most powerful people in a nation run by a strongman. He was not a man facing financial difficulty. Maybe that's just the job of a prosecutor, to simplify. And a reminder, LA Deputy District Attorney Craig Hum declined my request for an interview. Ngor was diminished, in my view, to a character out of some kind of tragic fairy tale. A grief-stricken widower who put up a fight in a mugging. A story that the police could easily hang around the necks of 3 teenagers and sell to their juries. It's a fairy tale that remains wrapped around their necks today. My name is Patricia Noonan, and this is Who Killed Haing Ngor? In the next episode, we'll get into the nitty-gritty about banks, and before too long, we're heading to Singapore. If you have any leads or want to contribute to the investigation, please reach out to me at whokilledhaingnor@gmail.com. I'm on Telegram as MP Noonan. If you'd like to support the investigation, there's a donation button on the webpage, whokilledhaingnor.com. Thank you for listening.